Hi dear audience, hope you would be fine. Today we are going to discuss post-colonialism, its historical development and some assumptions that what it refers majorly deals with. First of all, we are going to discuss its introduction. The term post-colonial or post-colonialism was first appeared in the scholarly journals in 1980s. Usually we refer the word post-colonial or post-colonialism to the period which started in the later of 1960s. We know in the 20th century there was the end of the empire, the Great Britain's empire. So after that period, from later 1960s to the up to the 2200, we refer this period as the post-colonial period. Means the period which started after the colonial empire of the Great Britain. But this term as post-colonialism appeared in 1980s, and it is the subtitles in the text such as Ashcroft, Griffiths and Tiffins previously mentioned. This was the very powerful work which appeared in 1980s and later on in 1990s in Ian Adams and Helen Tiffins, means the past and the lost post, theorizing post-colonialism and postmodernism, means the term has appeared in these works as well. So majorly by this name, the post-colonialism, the proponent of this term is Ashcroft. By the early 90s and mid 1990s, both terms become formally established in academic and popular discourse. Similarly to deconstruction, as in the later 20th century, we have been dealing with this term of deconstruction, feminism, post-feminism, and all these ones, post-modernism as well. This is basically an approach towards the textual analysis. Though it's the name of a movement, and though it's the name of a period which refers after the colonial empire, but it was basically a critical approach towards the textual analysis. It was basically a rewriting. You know, we are going to refer it that though it's very easy to label post-colonialism, but post-colonialism not only started from 1960s, as we know that this colonialism is as old as is the history of the man. So man has been colonizing the other people since its birth. So the word colonialism and post-colonialism is not new, but we are here talking about a movement of analysis, of textual analysis, which got prominence in later 1980s and 1990s. Similar to the deconstruction and other postmodern approaches to the textual analysis, post-colonialism refers to a heterogeneous field of study in which its spelling provides several alternatives. I mean, it was going to trace the other voices. One was the stance of colonialism, one was the stance of colonial representation, one was the stance of representing the colonized people. But when those colonized got their independence, they start rewriting. They started rewriting their representation. So post-colonialism or post-colonial, when we spelled it with hyphenated and without hyphenated, in the first you will see that this is the hyphenated post-colonialism. We spelled with a hyphen, mean post-colonialism. The term implies a chronological order, means after the period of colonization, when we put a hyphen in the post and the colonialism. So this is a change from a colonial to a post-colonial state, means the word with hyphenated and the without hyphenated. Now we see the term definition of it. The term refers to the writing that sets out in one way or the other way to resist the colonial perspective. This is very comprehensive definition. Means the methods of representation which have been adopted by the colonialist that have been rewritten by the post-colonialist. It also both refers to the before and after period of colonization. Means, for example, if we are going to take the example of India, So it's not that post-colonialism started after independence. Means even the people who were colonized, they have been writing against the colonial constructs and the perspective. According to some critics, the non-hyphenated spelling covers a wider critical period field, including literature of the former British colonies, even in 90s, even after the War of Independence, that 1857, there was a resistance against the colonial constructs. And if we have already talked about the Twilight in Delhi, so that was written in pre-post-colonial period, means in the 1940s. So that there is some sort of resistance against the colonial agenda. That does hyphenated spelling. Then there is the third orthographic variant of this term, means post with slash colonialism. Post slash colonial. Argue some critics is in more relevant that the previous two spellings, because it stresses the interrelatedness between the one indeterminate number of the literatures, be they anglophone. For example, if we take the example of E.M. Foster's A Passage to India, that's an anglophone, or not, that share a similar situation. The entangled condition means the entangled condition between the colonialist and the post-colonialist when they were living with one another. So this also refers to that situation as well, that exists between the colonial and the post-colonial discourse, and between coloniality and the post-coloniality. Today, the most common spelling of these three is the post-colonialism. So recently we use the term without hyphen or the slash. So what are its major concerns which post-colonialism takes into consideration? The major concerns have been evident when we examine the various topics discussed in one of the most prominent texts, the Post-Colonial Studies Reader. This was also edited by Ashcroft and Tiffin. These subjects include universality, means in the post 9/11 terms, or even before this, the empire has been presenting her stance as a universal, enlightened, modern one. So Western world constructed that the Western world is the universal, and the stance of Western world is natural, enlightened one, and the rest are the other, and they are not civilized. And this has been dealing with the difference which is created, difference of representation, difference of culture, difference of studies, difference of religion. All these has been presented in the colonial and the post-colonial. As we have already talked, that post-colonialism is basically going to challenge the Western constructs. So in the post-colonial, they have been challenging the universality of the Western world, the difference of their culture. They have been talking about their own nationalism, and they have been talking the oppressive strategies adopted by the Western world against the nationalism of the third world. Then the postmodernism representation and the resistance towards one's own culture. This has been the main agenda of the post-colonial literature. Ethnicity, feminism, language. Here, feminism means the third word's feminism. For example, the Western woman or the Western literary discourse have been constructed that Western woman is going to save the all females of the world. For example, the white woman is going to save the brown woman from the atrocities of the brown men. So these topics has been the of major concern. Language means the language of the Western world as superior. Our indigenous languages has also been the major concern. Education, history, place, and production. All these have been the major concerns of post-colonialism. As diverse as these topics are, they draw the attention to the post-colonialism's major concern. The struggle between which occurs between one culture is dominated by the other. So we see that in the colonial period, the Western intelligentsia or the discourse bearers have been misleading and misrepresenting the Eastern culture or the culture of others or the culture who were not who does not resemble to their culture. Uh, in the post-colonial period, they have been rewriting or challenging these constructs of the Western discourse. Now, if we see, as I have already talked, that colonialism is as old as the history of man, so it's deep rooted in the colonial power and prejudice. Definitely, colonial powers has been very oppressive, and they have been substantiating a particular amount of prejudice against the Easterns are the other people. Other means with inverted commas. Post-colonialism develops from a 400 years history of the strained culture relations between the colonies in Africa and Asia and the Western world. Throughout this long history, the West became colonizers and many Africans and Asian countries and their peoples became the colonized. During the 19th century, the Great Britain emerged as the largest colonizer and imperial power, quickly gaining the control of almost one quarter of the earth's land masses. So British Empire arose as the most colonial power. By the middle of the 19th century, terms such as colonial interest or the British Empire were very established one, were widely used both in media and the government policies and the international politics as well. So many British people believed that Great Britain was destined to rule the world. They took this phenomena or this assumption as inherited one, that the West and the rest and Great Britain is justified in its rule. Likewise, the assumption that Western Europeans and in the particularly in concert taking the same phenomena. As you know, right now, America considers this, that America is justified to rule all over the world. So the British people were biologically superior or any of than of any other race. Similarly, they have taken their religion as also a superior one, means the Christianity was taken as a superior religion than the other religions. A term for a class of people based on the physical or a cultural distinction remained relatively unquestioned, means there was no one to question this construct. Using its political and economic strength, Great Britain, the chief imperialist power of the 19th century, dominated her colonies, making them produce, then give up their country's raw material in exchange for what the material goods the colonized desired or were made to believe that they desired by the colonizers. Means they have been exchanging their culture and their educational stance with that of the material resources which they have been bringing from the colonies on the name of development as well, or on the name of missionary perspectives. So definitely in this manifestation we see that there was forced labor, exploitation, slavery, and all these have been commercialized by the Great Britain. Forced labor of the colonized became the rule of the day, and thus the institution of slavery was commercialized. Once the colonizers justified their cruel treatment of the colonized by invoking European religious belief that Christianity is the superior one. From this perspective of many white Westerns, the people of Africa, the America, and Asian were the heathens, means they were people of low grade, a less degree, possessing pagan ways that must be Christianized. How one treats people who are so defined there does not really matter. They maintain, because many Westerns subscribe to the colonialist ideology that all races other than the white are inferior, are the subhumans. These subhumans definitely were having their own culture, were having their own religion, were having their own lands as well. So the nationalists have been presenting the resistance against these ones. These subhumans are the savages, quickly became inferior, and equally evil are the others. And the philosophical concept called alterity, whereby the others are excluded from the position of power, viewed as both different and inferior. Alterity is considered the other aspect, the other one as. So we see that in the 20th century, then the process of decolonization started, which ultimately refers to our post-colonial construct or the period. By the early 20th century, England's political, social, and economic ideological domination of its colonies began to disappear. Uh, the major reasons behind this decolonization was the resistance by the colonized and the World War One and the Two. This process is known as the decolonization. By the mid-century, for example, India has gained her independence from British colonial rule. Many scholars believe that this event marks the beginning of the post-colonialism or the third world studies. This term, the word third world studies, has been coined by the French demographers Alfred Sauvé. When India received her independence, the former British colony was divided into two nations, the India Union and the Pakistan. This partition, was scholars dubbed as the Great Divide, led to the ethnic conflict of enormous proportion between India and Pakistan, which have been represented in Ice Candyman and Twilight and Daily if we talk of the India. Even in A Train to Pakistan by Khushwant Singh, a new member of the British Commonwealth in 1947 and mostly Muslim state of the Pakistan. Hundreds of the thousands of the people died in this struggle, igniting the outrage of vast array of scholars. Uh, it's this matter is not so simple, or it's not the number of games that so much people has been killed, but it basically has created a stance of resistance against the Britishers as well, and the post colonies were thrown into the horrified incidents and impact as well. The writers and the critics concerning the social, moral, political, and economic conditions as the after effects of the colonialism in what they once called the third world countries, they were very evident, and they were questioning this stance. Means they were rewriting their identity, that what we are. Uh, and now we see some literary productions which have raised such voice of the third world people. Following the decade witnessed the publication of additional keynotes that articulated the social, political, economic conditions of the various subaltern groups. The word subaltern also refers to the people of the colonized people, which have been colonized and have been treated as subaltern by the Great Britain. In 1960s, the Caribbean writer George Lemming. But keep in mind that this situation has not been only in India; it has been across the world. So, from the whole world, means all the countries which have been former colonies of the Great Britain, they have been writing against this atrocities of colonialism, and they start rewriting their identity. So, The Player of Exile, a text which Lemming critiques William Shakespeare's play The Tempest from post-colonial perspective, means in which the white has been taken as justified masters. The next year's Fanons published The Rest of the Earth in 1961, a work that highlights the tension and binary opposition of the white versus the blacks, and means good versus evil and rich versus the poor, to cite a few. Other writers, philosophers, and the critics such as Albert Memmi continued publishing texts such as Colonizers and Decolonized in 1965. That's the English version. That would soon be cornerstone of the political theory and writings. So these were the texts which gives a post-colonial consciousness. In particular, post-colonialism gained the attention of West with the publication of Edward Said's Orientalism in 1978, and Bill Ashcroft's The Empire Writes Back. The Empire Writes Back was is a significant book which reversed this Western stance and theory and practice in post-colonial literature, which was written in 1989. With the publication of these two texts means the Orientalism and the Empire writes back the voices and the concerns of many subaltern cultures from Africa, from Asia. Cultures would have been soon heard in both academic and social arenas. So this is all about post-colonialism. Uh, Later on, we would be discussing the post-colonial types of analysis, how the post-colonial are the construct, which stances are, which sorts of representations post-colonial writer has been challenging. That might be include the cultural superiority, diaspora, nationalism. All these we are going to be discussed in the next our video. Up to that, goodbye, take care.